The thing about being the family scapegoat is that you spend so many years absorbing their cruelty that you start to mistake it for weather. You stop asking why it rains. You just learn to carry an umbrella and move through it. I stopped carrying the umbrella the afternoon my mother looked at my 7-year-old son and said loud enough for the entire table to hear that he didn't belong there. My name is Veronica Ashford. I am 36 years old. I am a senior risk analyst at one of the largest insurance underwriting firms in the country, which means I spend my professional life calculating the precise cost of disasters before they happen. I am very good at it. I am also, as it turns out, very good at engineering them when the occasion demands. This is the story of how a single sentence spoken at a 4th of July barbecue started a chain reaction that ended with my family losing everything they had spent 3 decades pretending to own. Let me start with the house because the house is important. My parents, Gerald and Miriam Ashford, had owned a property in Westport, Connecticut for 22 years. It was a large colonial on 2 acres with a wraparound porch and a swimming pool and a detached garage that my father had converted into what he called his study and what the rest of us recognized as a place where he went to drink scotch and avoid accountability. The house was the centerpiece of my parents' identity, the physical proof of a success that was, as I had come to understand in the last 18 months, substantially more fiction than fact. My parents were asset-rich and cash-poor in the specific way of people who have spent decades living slightly beyond their means and have become so practiced at the performance of wealth that they have lost track of where the performance ends and the reality begins. My father was a retired partner at a mid-size accounting firm, not a large one, not a prestigious one, the kind that handles regional commercial clients and celebrates with modest bonuses at Christmas. My mother had never worked in any formal sense. She volunteered at the kind of organizations that required a significant annual donation to join and spent the rest of her time maintaining the social architecture of their lives with the focused, invisible labor of someone who understood that appearances required constant maintenance. They had 2 daughters. Charlotte was 2 years younger than me and had emerged from childhood as the version of a daughter my mother had wanted: blonde, decorative, socially fluent, and entirely comfortable in the role of golden child. She had married well by my mother's definition, a man named Preston Whitmore III, who had inherited a small amount of family money and stretched it into a large amount of surface confidence. Preston worked in private wealth management, a profession that in his case meant introducing wealthy clients to investment products and collecting commissions. He wore bespoke suits to casual events and spoke about the market with the authority of someone who had never once been wrong in his own retelling. And then there was me. I had gone a different direction. I studied actuarial science, passed my professional exams on the first attempt, built a career on the unglamorous precision of risk modeling. I drove a sensible car. I wore clothes that were expensive in the specific way that requires no announcement. I had been married briefly in my late 20s to a man who was kind and unsuited to me, and we had parted without drama. I had not remarried. What I had done 3 years ago was adopt Marcus. Marcus was 7 now, small for his age, with large dark eyes and a habit of tilting his head slightly when he was processing something complicated, which gave him the permanent appearance of a person paying very close attention to the world. He had entered the foster system at age 2, after a situation I will not detail here because it is his story and not mine to tell. He had lived in 3 placements before he came to me, and the wariness he carried from those years was a real and present thing, visible in the way he watched the room when we entered a new space, in the way he went very still when adult voices rose. He was the most perceptive person I had ever met at any age. He noticed everything. He felt everything. And he was the bravest person I knew, which people sometimes found surprising when I said it, because bravery in a 7-year-old does not look like bravery in an adult. In a 7-year-old, bravery looks like choosing to trust again after you have learned that trust is not safe. My family's relationship with Marcus was a thing I had been managing since the adoption finalized. My mother's initial reaction had been what I can only describe as a careful social performance of acceptance. She said the right words in the right order, but her eyes during those words told a different story. My father had simply redirected the conversation to something about the property market. Charlotte had posted a single congratulatory comment on social media and then declined 3 consecutive invitations to meet him. Preston had said at a family dinner 6 months after the adoption that it was admirable of me to give a child like that a chance. I had not forgotten the phrase "a child like that." But I had absorbed it the way I absorbed most things from my family, filed it, categorized it, added it to the running calculation I had been maintaining my entire life of what these people were and what they were capable of. By 4th of July weekend, that calculation was nearly complete. The annual Ashford 4th of July barbecue was my mother's production in the way that all important occasions were my mother's productions. She had been hosting it for 15 years on the wide back lawn of the Westport house, and it had grown over time into something that served less as a family gathering and more as a demonstration of the family's social standing, a curated event at which the right people were invited, the right caterer was retained, and the overall aesthetic communicated prosperity without vulgarity. This year's version had a navy and white nautical theme, which I knew because my mother had sent a group email in May, specifying the dress code and noting that while patriotic colors were of course acceptable, she hoped guests would aim for a more refined coastal interpretation. Marcus and I had driven up from the city that morning in my car, arriving at the house just after 11. The lawn was already arranged long tables with white linen cloths, navy-striped runners, centerpieces of white hydrangeas, and small American flags that had been styled to look tasteful rather than festive. The caterer, a woman named Sophie, who my mother had used for 4 years, was moving efficiently through the setup with her 2 assistants. About 20 people were already present, including my mother's country club friends, my father's former colleagues, several cousins I saw once a year, and at the far end of the main table, Charlotte and Preston. Charlotte was wearing a white linen sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and looked precisely as beautiful as she always did. Preston was standing with a group of my father's former colleagues already talking his body language, broadcasting the specific relaxed authority of a man who never questions his right to be the most interesting person in a conversation. Marcus held my hand as we crossed the lawn. He was wearing his blue polo shirt, his choice not mine, and his good sneakers, and he had asked 3 times on the drive up whether there would be a pool at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I had told him yes, and he had spent the rest of the drive asking whether he would get to swim, which I had said probably, and whether there would be hot dogs, which I had said definitely. My mother saw us from across the lawn. She crossed toward us with the contained, purposeful stride of a hostess, managing a production, and she kissed my cheek in the way she always kissed my cheek, precisely with no warmth, the gesture of a woman who had learned the mechanics of maternal affection without the underlying feeling. She looked at Marcus. "Hello, Marcus," she said. Her voice had the particular quality it always had when she addressed him correct, adequate, the vocal equivalent of a form letter. Marcus looked up at her. "Hi, Grandma Miriam." Yes, my mother had specifically asked him not to call her Grandma, just Miriam, she had said, when I had first introduced them. She had framed it as a preference for informality. I had understood it for what it was. "There's lemonade at the drinks table," she said to him. "Don't touch the flower arrangements." Then she turned to me and began talking about the seating chart. The morning passed in the way of these events surfaced pleasantries over a landscape of managed tension. I spoke with my father's former colleague, David Hartley, about nothing in particular. I exchanged polite conversation with my Aunt Patricia, who was my mother's sister, and who had the saving grace of being genuinely fond of Marcus. She had brought him a small puzzle book from her local bookstore, which he immediately sat down with at the end of the table absorbed. Charlotte came to speak with me around 12:30. She hugged me in the way she hugged me briefly, efficiently, the hug of someone performing the gesture rather than feeling it. She was holding a glass of rosé, and she had the particular glow of someone who has been validated by their circumstances and has not yet had reason to question them. "You look tired," she said. "I'm well, thank you," I said. "Marcus seems settled," she offered, glancing toward the end of the table where he was working his puzzle. The word settled had a quality to it that I noted but didn't address. "He's wonderful," I said simply. Charlotte's smile was the smile she used when she wanted to appear warm while maintaining a careful distance from the subject. "Preston was saying on the drive up that you must have so much patience taking on something like this at your stage of life. It's very selfless." Something like this. I counted the phrase, added it to the file. "It's not selfless," I said. "He's my son. I wanted to be his mother." "Of course," Charlotte said in the voice she used when she was moving past a topic. "Are you seeing anyone Mom mentioned she ran into someone from your old firm who said you'd been out of the social scene?" "I have a full life," I said. "Of course you do." She drifted back toward Preston. Lunch was served at 1 o'clock: grilled salmon, corn on the cob, a green salad, potato salad with what my mother always described as Sophie's special dressing, which was the same dressing every year and which the guests were expected to admire annually. The caterer and her assistants moved through the service with quiet efficiency. My mother sat at the head of the long table, my father to her right. Charlotte and Preston were at the center, surrounded by the country club friends. I was toward the end next to Aunt Patricia with Marcus beside me. Marcus was managing his corn with the focused determination of a 7-year-old taking on a genuinely challenging task. He had already eaten most of his salmon and had asked twice about the hot dogs, which were apparently coming later. Patricia was asking him about his puzzle book, and he was answering with the careful, considered responses he gave to adults who seemed genuinely interested in what he said, which he could reliably distinguish from adults who were performing interest, a skill that remained both impressive and quietly heartbreaking to observe. The table was at that specific pleasant volume of a large outdoor lunch conversation, overlapping the sound of silverware, the occasional laugh. My mother was describing the renovation she and my father were planning for the pool house to the country club friends seated near her. Preston was telling someone a story about a client whose portfolio had doubled in 18 months. Marcus picked up his corn again and took a large bite. A small amount of butter transferred from the corn to his cheek. He noticed, reached for his napkin, and in the process knocked his fork off the table. It hit the stone patio with a sharp clatter. The sound was not remarkable. Marcus said sorry quietly, bent sideways to pick up the fork himself, wiped it on his napkin, and set it back on the table. The entire sequence took approximately 4 seconds. At my end of the table, the conversation with Patricia barely paused. At my mother's end of the table, a different response occurred. Miriam Ashford set down her wineglass with the specific deliberateness of a woman who has decided to address something. She looked down the length of the table at Marcus. Then she looked at me. "Veronica," she said. Her voice carried. The table conversations didn't stop all at once, but they damped the way sound damped in a room when someone with authority spoke. People near her end looked toward her. People near my end registered the shift and looked that direction. "This event is important to our family and to our guests," my mother said. "I have asked you before to think carefully about whether Marcus is ready for occasions like this. He clearly is not. He is uncomfortable here, and he is making the other guests uncomfortable." She paused, her tone taking on the quality of someone delivering a reasonable conclusion that should have been reached earlier. "In the future, when you come to family events, please make appropriate arrangements. Don't bring the boy." The table was very quiet. My father was looking at his plate. Charlotte's expression was the careful neutrality of someone watching a car accident from across the street. Preston had turned his head slightly away. The country club friends were doing what people do when social situations become uncomfortable, looking at objects their hands the middle distance. Aunt Patricia had gone very still beside me. I looked at my mother. I felt with great clarity the thing I had been building toward for 18 months. Not anger, I had moved through anger a long time ago. Something colder, something with a structure to it. Before I could speak, something happened. At the end of the table, there was movement. My 17-year-old niece, Jade, Charlotte's daughter, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the junior table with her cousin Ben, and Marcus pushed her chair back. I had not expected Jade. Jade was in the specific, complicated way of teenagers who have grown up in families with defined hierarchies, someone I watched carefully but did not always know. She was her mother's daughter in her appearance, the same blonde hair, the same easy social grace, but she had been watching her grandmother and her mother and her stepfather with the particular attention of someone who is assembling a picture and does not yet know what to do with what they see. She stood up. She was tall for 17, nearly 5'8", and she had the physical presence of someone who has not yet fully learned to minimize herself, which she deployed now without apparent awareness of it. She looked down the length of both tables at her grandmother. "That's a horrible thing to say," Jade said. Her voice was even, not a teenager's raised voice, not a performance of outrage, just a clear declarative sentence delivered without ornamentation. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother turned to look at her granddaughter with the expression of a woman encountering an unexpected obstacle. "Jade, he's 7. Jade continued. She looked at Marcus, who had gone very still, his large eyes moving between Jade and his grandmother with the rapid assessment of a child reading a room for safety. "He dropped a fork. That's what kids do." She looked back at Miriam. You don't get to talk about him like he's an inconvenience. He's not an inconvenience. He's a little kid at a family lunch. Charlotte said, "Jade, sit down." "No," Jade said. Charlotte looked at Preston. Preston looked at his plate. My father cleared his throat. "Young lady, your grandmother is speaking from a place of genuine concern for the event. She told her son to leave his child at home because he dropped a fork." Jade said, her voice still level, cutting my father's attempted reframe off cleanly. "That's not concern for the event, that's—" She paused, searching for the word, and finding it. "That's cruelty." And everyone at this table heard it and no one said anything. The accusation landed on the table like the fork had cleanly audibly impossible to pretend away. I looked at my daughter, not by birth, this girl, who was Charlotte's daughter, and who was in this moment something I had not seen coming, and I felt something shift. Not the cold calculation I had been carrying, something older and less managed. "Jade," I said quietly. She looked at me. "Thank you," I said. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked at Marcus. "You want to go check out the pool?" she asked him, as if the previous 30 seconds had been a brief interruption and not a small earthquake. Marcus looked at me. I nodded. He took Jade's offered hand and they walked across the lawn together. The 17-year-old and the 7-year-old moving away from the table, with the easy solidarity of two people who understand each other without explanation. I watched them go until they were safely out of earshot. Then I turned back to the table. My mother had recovered her composure. This was her particular gift, the rapid reassembly of surface after disruption. She reached for her wineglass and looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been subjected to an unreasonable scene and is choosing generously not to make further issue of it. "I hope you'll speak to Jade about appropriate behavior," she said to Charlotte as if I were not present. Charlotte started to say something. "I'll speak," I said. The table looked at me. I had a particular way of being still in high-stakes situations that I had developed over years of professional practice, depositions, board presentations, the specific disciplined stillness of a person who has learned that the voice carries more weight when the body doesn't accompany it with noise. I employed it now. "I'm not going to address Jade's behavior," I said, because Jade's behavior was correct. She said what every adult at this table should have said. I looked at my mother steadily. "You told me not to bring my son to family events. I want to understand what you mean by that. So let's be precise. Do you mean this event specifically? Do you mean all future events? Do you mean that Marcus is not considered part of this family?" "Veronica, this isn't the—" "I'd like an answer," I said. My mother's expression shifted, the contained, managed composure showing its first real crack. "He is not our blood," she said. The words were quieter than her earlier pronouncement, but they were also more honest, and that honesty made them worse. "We love you. We want you at our events, but this is a family gathering, and he is a child you have taken on, which is admirable, but he is not. He is not the same as Blake. He is my son," I said. "By legal arrangement," my mother said. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the 18 months of work I had done. I thought about the folder on my laptop. I thought about the phone calls I had made in the last 3 weeks to 3 different attorneys and 2 federal regulatory offices. "All right," I said. My voice was very quiet. "I want you to hear something, Mom, and I want everyone at this table to hear it because I think it's relevant to what happens next." I paused. I have spent the last 18 months doing what I do professionally. I've been conducting a risk analysis of this family's financial situation. Not because I was looking for trouble, because 3 months after I finalized Marcus's adoption, I discovered something in a document that was sent to my address by mistake, and what I found required me to look further. My father had gone very still. "Gerald," I said, using his first name in the way I never did, "do you want to tell the table what a HELOC is, or should I—" My father's face did something complicated. "Veronica." "A home equity line of credit," I said for the benefit of the table. "It's a revolving credit line secured against a property. It's an entirely legitimate financial tool. What makes it problematic is when it's taken out without the knowledge of a co-owner of the property." I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "And what makes it criminal is when the co-owner's signature on the application was forged." The table was completely silent. My mother had stopped reaching for her wineglass. "I am a co-owner of this property," I said. "I have been since my grandmother added me to the deed when I was 19 because she was concerned correctly, as it turns out, about my parents' financial management. She did it without telling them, and because none of us ever needed to discuss it, it remained a quiet fact for 17 years. I paused. Until 18 months ago, when I received a misdirected bank statement showing a $380,000 line of credit secured against this property bearing a signature that was supposed to be mine and was not. Preston's glass was halfway to his mouth and had stopped there. I want to be clear, I continued. I am not bringing this up because of what just happened with Marcus. This is not retaliation for a rude comment at a barbecue. This has been in process for 18 months. What happened today simply removed my last reason to wait any longer to have this conversation. My father stood up. This is a private family matter. It stopped being a private family matter the moment you forged a federal document, I said. Sit down, Dad. He didn't sit down immediately, but he stopped speaking. Where did the money go? Charlotte asked. Her voice was very small. She was looking at our father, not at me. I looked at Charlotte and felt something that was not quite sympathy but was adjacent to it, the specific compassion one feels for a person who has built their comfort on a foundation they did not know was unstable. That's the second part of this conversation, I said. And it involves Preston. Preston set his glass down. Let me tell you what I had found and how I had found it. The misdirected bank statement had arrived in my mailbox, physical mail sent to my apartment address in the city rather than to the Westport house 18 months ago. My parents had at some point listed my city address as a secondary contact on the account, perhaps as a bureaucratic artifact of my being a co-owner of the property, perhaps for some other reason I never determined. The statement had been opened before I noticed the address error, and once I saw the account details, the amount, the account structure, the secondary borrower listed, I stopped and read it carefully. The signature on the application, which I obtained through a records request 6 weeks later, was a credible forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. The specific formation of my capital V, the way I closed my A, these were details that mattered to a handwriting examiner and that I knew would matter because I had worked on enough fraud cases to understand the evidentiary weight of signature analysis. What I had not immediately understood was what my parents had done with $380,000. The answer to that question had taken 11 months to reconstruct, and it had led me by a route I had not anticipated to Preston Whitmore III. Preston ran a private wealth management practice. This was legitimate. He was licensed, regulated, operating within the legal framework. What was less legitimate was a specific investment vehicle he had been offering to select clients, a private fund structured as a limited partnership, promising above-market returns through what he described in his marketing materials as proprietary algorithmic trading strategies. I am a risk analyst. Algorithmic trading strategies that consistently outperform the market are in the actuarial sense extremely improbable. When I encountered them in the context of a financial product being pitched to retirees and high net worth individuals with limited investment sophistication, I recognized the shape of the thing. I had my own contacts at the SEC's Investor Protection Office. I had been building financial compliance cases for a decade. When I began pulling the thread on Preston's funds, starting with my parents' $380,000 and working outward, what I found was consistent with a specific pattern of fraud that regulators call affinity fraud, targeting investors through trusted social networks. In this case, the same country club community my parents had spent 15 years cultivating. My parents' $380,000 was gone. It had been used to pay earlier investors in the fund, the specific mechanism that defines a Ponzi structure. The fund itself had no meaningful underlying assets. Preston's reported returns were fabricated. 14 other investors had placed money with him through the same social network in amounts ranging from $50,000 to $400,000. I had filed a comprehensive report with the SEC's Enforcement Division 9 weeks ago. The investigation had been opened. An asset freeze had been applied to Preston's professional accounts 3 weeks ago. He did not yet know I was the source of the complaint. He was about to. Preston, I said, the SEC froze your professional accounts on June 14th. Preston's face went through several expressions very quickly. I know this because I filed the complaint that triggered the investigation, I said. I know this because I am the person who traced the $380,000 that my parents borrowed against this property, using my forged signature into your fund, and from there, through the payment structure of what is in the regulatory definition, a fraudulent investment scheme. Charlotte made a sound. It was not a word. You have been running an affinity fraud operation. I continued addressing Preston with the precise neutral voice I used in professional settings. You have taken money from 14 investors in this social network, people who trusted you because they trusted my parents, who trusted you because you are married to their daughter. You have returned fabricated statements showing gains that do not exist. The underlying fund has no meaningful assets. The returns you have reported are manufactured. That is, Preston began. I have the wire transfer records, I said. I have the fund statements alongside the actual trading records. I have the investor correspondence. I have the structure of the payment flows between investors. I have submitted 412 pages of documentation to the SEC Enforcement Division and a parallel submission to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Connecticut. I paused. You are going to be indicted, Preston. The timeline is not certain, but the outcome is. The country club friends were very still. My father was holding the edge of the table. My mother's wine glass was still in her hand, and she appeared to have forgotten it was there. Charlotte was looking at her husband the way people look at a stranger who has been occupying a familiar face. Charlotte, I said, and my voice shifted the professional register set aside for something more direct. Your name is not on the fund documents. You are not implicated in the fraud itself. But you need a lawyer. You need one today, not next week. You need to understand your own financial exposure, and you need to do it with independent counsel before Preston's attorneys start managing the narrative. Charlotte looked at me. Her face was doing something I had not seen on it before, not the careful managed surface, not the golden child ease. Something stripped and uncertain and very young. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you're my sister, I said. And because your daughter just stood up and did something brave, and she deserves to have the adults in her life start behaving accordingly. What happened next was not dramatic in the way of movies, it was dramatic in the way of real life, which is messier and slower and involves more standing around than anyone anticipates. My father attempted to make a speech about family solidarity and private resolution. I let him speak and then told him calmly that the time for private resolution had been any of the 18 months during which he could have come to me honestly about what had happened, and that window had closed. My mother attempted to cry. The tears were real enough. I don't doubt that her distress was genuine, but they were directed at her own situation rather than at any recognition of what she had done. She said several things about how she had never expected it would come to this and how she had always tried to do what was best for the family. I listened without responding to the substance of any of it. Preston said very little after my initial disclosure. He had the specific silence of a person running calculations, assessing exposure, considering options, recognizing that the person across from him had information he had not anticipated she would have. He was calculating. So was I. I had calculated him very precisely. It was Aunt Patricia who broke the surface tension about 20 minutes into the general frozen quality that had settled over the table. She stood up quietly and walked to where I was sitting. She placed her hand on my shoulder. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to go check on the kids." "Thank you," I said. She crossed the lawn toward the pool area where Jade and Marcus had been swimming for the past half hour, entirely insulated from what had just happened. I watched her go and I felt the thing I had been holding at professional distance for 18 months, the long, patient, meticulous work of it, the isolation of carrying it alone, the specific grief of discovering that the people who were supposed to love you were capable of this. I felt it move through me and settle somewhere. Not done, not finished, but moved. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I looked at my mother, who was still sitting at the head of the table. She had spent 15 years maintaining, surrounded by the nautical-themed decorations she had organized, with such care in a life that was about to change significantly and irrevocably. "I'm going to go be with my son," I said. Nobody stopped me. I walked across the lawn in the July afternoon past the catering tables and the white hydrangeas and the small American flags that had been arranged for maximum tasteful effect toward the sound of a 7-year-old laughing at the edge of a pool. The pool area was separated from the main lawn by a low hedge and a flagstone path. As I came around the hedge, I saw them Jade sitting on the pool steps with her feet in the water, Marcus in his swim ring. He had asked about it twice on the drive up, and Patricia had located it in the pool house, doing the specific circular paddling that 7-year-olds do when they have discovered that water will hold them. Patricia was in one of the pool chairs watching them with the comfortable attention of someone who is simply present. Marcus saw me first. His face did the thing it did when he spotted me at school pickup or after a long day of brightness that I had learned not to take for granted because I understood what it had cost him to learn to show it. "Mom, I'm swimming." "I can see that," I said. I sat on the edge of the pool, took off my shoes, and put my feet in the water. Jade looked at me. She had her mother's ability to read a room, but she had directed it differently toward understanding rather than toward managing. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It's complicated," I said, "but it's going to be all right." She nodded. She was 17 and she was processing something about the adults in her family that would take her years to fully absorb, but she was doing it with the particular steadiness of a person who has learned to trust her own observations. "What you did at the table," I said, "that was brave." "I just said what was true," she said. "That's what brave usually is," I said. Marcus paddled over to where I was sitting and grabbed my ankle. "Is there going to be hot dogs?" "There are definitely going to be hot dogs," I said. He paddled back out, satisfied. Patricia looked at me from her chair. She had known me since I was born. She had watched my family for 36 years with the clear-eyed observation of someone who loved the individuals in it and saw them without the distortion of being inside the central dynamic. "I wondered how long it would take," she said. 18 months, I said. "I know," she said. "I watched you working it out." She paused. "Are you all right?" I looked at Marcus in his swim ring making determined circles in the afternoon light. "Yes," I said, and I meant it completely. Back at the main table, things were in motion. Charlotte had stood up and walked to the far end of the garden and was on her phone. I could see her from the pool area, pacing in a tight circle, her white linen dress very bright against the dark green of the hedge. Preston had not moved from his chair, which struck me as the response of a man who understood that movement in any direction was complicated. My father had found my mother's hand. They were sitting together at the head of the table with the tableau quality of two people in a life raft, holding on to each other because they were holding on to each other, not because anyone had assessed whether the raft was sound. The country club friends had largely dissolved. A few had stayed more out of social paralysis than solidarity, but most had found reasons to leave in the half-hour following my disclosure. The caterer and her assistants, with the professional discretion of people who have worked enough events to know when to become invisible, were quietly clearing the lunch service. The 4th of July barbecue that my mother had spent 3 months planning was over at 2:15 in the afternoon without hot dogs or fireworks or the coastal chic family photographs she had intended. I was not responsible for its ending. My parents had made the choices that ended it 18 months ago, and further back than that in a long series of decisions that had accumulated into the specific crisis now sitting at their patio table. What I was responsible for was making sure the ending was complete. Not vindictive. I had no interest in destruction for its own sake, but complete, because the alternative was another cycle of absorption and management and the carrying of things that were not mine to carry. I had carried enough. An hour later, as Marcus was toweling off and Jade was helping him locate his sandals, my phone rang. The number was one. I recognized David Reeves, the SEC enforcement attorney I had been in contact with for the past 9 weeks. I walked to the far corner of the pool area and answered. "Miss Ashford," he said, "we've been trying to reach Preston Whitmore. His cell phone is going to voicemail." "He's at a family event," I said. "He's aware that the investigation is active." A pause. "Did you disclose your involvement to him today?" "I disclosed the existence of the complaint and the general parameters of the evidence," I said. "I did not disclose your office's specific investigative steps or timeline." "All right." Another pause. "We're moving more quickly than originally anticipated. There are some developments I should brief you on. Can you come in Monday?" "Yes," I said. "Good." He paused once more. "One more thing. The property records, you submitted the deed showing co-ownership of the Westport property. We've had our real estate fraud unit look at it. The forged signature issue on the HELOC is going to be part of what we bring. Your parents are going to face charges separately from Whitmore." I watched Marcus trying to put his left sandal on his right foot and Jade patiently redirecting him. "I know," I said. "Is that still what you want?" I thought about the morning. about my mother's voice carrying over the table, about the words "don't bring the boy," about 20 people eating their potato salad in silence while a 7-year-old absorbed the information that he was not considered part of a family. "Yes," I said, "that's still what I want." We said goodbye and I went back to my son. We ate hot dogs at 5 o'clock. By that point, the catering setup had been largely cleared, the country club friends were gone, and the remaining family members had reorganized themselves into smaller, quieter clusters. My parents had gone inside. I could see them through the French doors of the kitchen, moving around each other with the careful, stricken movements of two people who have received news that has not yet fully resolved into reality. Charlotte had come back from her garden phone call with red eyes and a composure that was more effortful than usual. She had spoken briefly to Preston, and then Preston had gone to sit alone near the far end of the lawn, looking at his phone with the expression of a man assessing the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. Charlotte found me at the grill where I was turning hot dogs with the competence of someone who had cooked approximately 10,000 meals alone. She stood beside me for a moment without speaking. "Jade told me what she said at the table," Charlotte said finally. "She was right," I said. "I know." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the grill, not at me. "I should have said something. I didn't." "No," I said. "You didn't." "I never do," she said. It was not a defense. It was an observation delivered with the flat accuracy of someone arriving at a truth they had been avoiding. I turned another hot dog. "What's going to happen to Preston?" she asked. "He's going to be indicted," I said. "The specific charges and timeline depend on factors I don't control, but the evidence is substantial and the pattern is clear." I paused. "You need a lawyer, Charlotte, not his lawyer, your own." "I don't have money for—" She stopped. The sentence had revealed something. "Did you know the fund wasn't real?" I asked. She was quiet for long enough that the silence was itself an answer. "Not the specifics," she said, "but I knew something wasn't right. There were things he said that didn't add up, statements that didn't match what I thought I knew. I told myself I was being paranoid." She paused. "I was scared of what it would mean if I wasn't." "I know," I said. "I let them treat Marcus the way they treat him," she said. "I never said anything. I thought I told myself it wasn't my place. He's your son, not mine. It wasn't my fight." I looked at her. "He's a child," I said. "That makes him everyone's responsibility." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. "Jade gets it," she said with a kind of wondering sadness. "She's 17 and she gets it, and I'm 34 and I've spent my whole life being the good one, and I don't actually know what I've been good at." I picked up a hot dog and put it in a bun and handed it to her. "Start with the lawyer," I said. "Everything else can come after." She took the hot dog. She held it without eating it for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "For today, for all of it." "I know," I said. I handed her a napkin. "Go find Jade." She did. At 7 o'clock, as the evening light turned gold over the Westport lawn, Marcus fell asleep in the back seat of my car before we reached the end of the driveway. I had said a brief formal goodbye to my parents at the kitchen door. My father had tried once more to make a speech about family and handling things properly, and I had looked at him for a moment without expression and then told him his attorney would be in contact with mine regarding the property deed and the Hellick documentation. My mother had not spoken. She stood behind my father with her arms crossed over her chest, wearing her Miriam Ashford expression, the one that said she was managing something and would not be seen to be managing it. I had left them with that. Jade walked me to the car. She helped Marcus in. He was already half asleep, and she buckled him with the careful efficiency of a teenager who had spent time around young children and knew how. She stood by the driver's door for a moment. "Will you tell me what happens?" she said. When everything happens with Dad and Grandma and Grandpa, will you tell me?" "Yes," I said. "Because no one tells me things," she said. "In my family, everyone acts like if you don't say something, it doesn't exist." "I know," I said. "I grew up in the same family." She looked at me with the particular directness of a person who has not yet learned to perform things. "You turned out okay." "I had help," I said. "Aunt Patricia and Marcus." I paused. "And apparently you." She almost smiled. "I just said what was true." "Keep doing that," I said. She stepped back from the car. I pulled out of the driveway, and in the rearview mirror I watched her standing on the lawn in the July evening, getting smaller as I drove away. Marcus slept the whole way home. I drove through the Connecticut evening with the specific quiet of someone who has set something in motion that will not stop until it reaches its conclusion, and who is at peace with that. The work was not finished, but it was begun. The Monday after the 4th of July, I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a federal building in New Haven and spent 3 hours walking David Reeves and his colleague through the documentation I had assembled over 18 months. Marcus was at day camp. He had started going 3 weeks ago a program at a community center near our apartment that did swimming and art and what the brochure called collaborative building projects, which in practice meant the kids made things out of cardboard and tape and were very proud of them. He came home on the first day with a small cardboard boat he had made and presented it to me with the seriousness of someone delivering an important artifact. I had put it on my desk where it still was. I thought about the cardboard boat while David Reeves walked me through the timeline of the investigation because thinking about the cardboard boat kept me anchored to the reason I was sitting in this room. Not the money, not the property, not the particular satisfaction of watching a calculated plan reach its execution. Marcus's cardboard boat sitting on my desk next to the photograph of the two of us from his first day of second grade, next to the small framed print he had picked out at a street fair because he said the colors were happy. Those were the reasons. The asset freeze on Whitmore's professional accounts has been in place for 3 weeks, David said. He had a precise, unhurried manner that I appreciated a lawyer who said what was necessary and did not ornament it. His personal accounts are separate and not yet frozen, but we have visibility into the transfer patterns and we're watching for movement. He was calculating at the table on Saturday, I said. He'll try to move assets. We anticipate that, eh? David said. It's actually helpful when they try. It adds additional charges. He looked at his notes. Your parents' situation is somewhat separate from Whitmore's. The identity theft and HELOC fraud is a state matter primarily, though the forged federal document aspect gives us concurrent jurisdiction. The Connecticut AG's office has been briefed. What's the likely outcome for them? I asked. David paused in the measured way of someone considering how to be accurate without being reassuring. For your mother, who appears to have been the primary actor on the HELOC application, the one who arranged the forgery, made the call, signed the documents, the exposure is significant. Felony identity theft, bank fraud, forgery of a notarized document. Your father signed some of the paperwork as well, which makes him a co-conspirator, regardless of how much he claims to have deferred to your mother. He deferred to her entirely, I said. That's always been the pattern. The law doesn't recognize that as a defense, David said not unkindly. I looked at the documents spread across the conference table, 18 months of work organized into tabbed sections with the specific, neat precision I brought to every professional project. I had built this file the way I built every risk assessment, methodically, without sentiment, following the evidence where it led. There was no dramatic discovery, no single moment of revelation. There was just the patient accumulation of facts, until the facts spoke clearly enough that their conclusion was undeniable. The property, I said. What happens to it? The HELOC is in default, David said. Has been for 9 months. The bank has been sending notices to the Westport address. Your parents received them and appear to have done nothing in response, possibly hoping the investigation would resolve before foreclosure proceedings became irreversible. He paused. They're past the point of reversal. The bank initiated formal foreclosure proceedings 6 weeks ago. The timeline to execution is approximately 60 to 90 days. I had known this. I had tracked the foreclosure proceeding through the public court records, but hearing it stated plainly by someone else had a different quality than reading it in a legal database at 11 o'clock at night. And as a co-owner of the property, I said, as a co-owner, you have specific rights in the foreclosure proceeding, David said, including the right of first refusal at the auction and the right to make a competing bid. Given that the HELOC was taken out against your equity without your consent, the court may also entertain a motion to have the debt assigned entirely to the fraudulent borrowers rather than against the full property value. He looked at me steadily. You've had an attorney review your options. Yes, I said. Margaret Chen, who had been my attorney on the adoption and had taken on this matter as an extension of that relationship. Margaret was 61, had practiced real estate and family law in Connecticut for 30 years, and had the specific, unshakable composure of someone who had seen every variety of human financial disaster and remained clear-eyed about all of them. "Then you know what your options are," David said. "I know what I'm going to do," I said. I had known what I was going to do for about 4 months. The decision had not been made in anger or in the specific heat of any particular incident. It had been made on a Tuesday evening in March after Marcus had a bad night, the kind that still happened occasionally, less often than they used to, but still real when something in the day had activated the old wariness, and he woke up at 2 a.m, disoriented and frightened, and I sat with him on his bedroom floor until he was calm, talking quietly about nothing in particular, until his breathing steadied and he fell back asleep. I had sat there after he was asleep in the dark of his room, listening to him breathe, and I had thought very clearly about what I wanted the next 10 years to look like. Not for me, for him, what I wanted the environment of his childhood to contain. Not the Ashford family dynamic, not the careful management of whose feelings needed protecting and who was allowed to occupy how much space. Not the annual recalibration of how much of Marcus I could bring to family events before my mother's discomfort became audible. I wanted something clean, something that was ours. The property in Westport was technically partly mine. My grandmother had put me on the deed because she loved me and because she had a clear-eyed view of her daughter and son-in-law that she had never expressed directly, but had expressed through this single concrete act, placing an asset where my parents couldn't reach it without my cooperation. She had been right to do it. She had been right about all of it 17 years before the fact. The house was large, and it was on 2 acres on the Connecticut shoreline, and it had a swimming pool. Marcus had asked about swimming in it 3 times on the drive to the 4th of July barbecue. He had swum in it all afternoon while the adults arranged their disaster at the patio table. He had been happy there in the uncomplicated way of a child doing something physical in a safe space. I had thought about that too. The weeks following the 4th of July had the specific quality of a structure that has sustained a foundational crack and is in the process of deciding how to fall. My parents did not contact me directly in the first 10 days. This was consistent with their pattern. When something complicated happened, my mother processed it by constructing a narrative in which she was the primary victim and then deploying that narrative to the extended family network before addressing the actual situation. I knew this was happening because I began receiving messages from relatives. I rarely spoke with my mother's sister from Florida, a cousin on my father's side, my parents' neighbor who had apparently been recruited as an intermediary. The messages followed a consistent script that I had ambushed my family at a holiday gathering with unfounded financial allegations, that my adoption of Marcus had clearly created instability in my life that was causing me to lash out at the people who loved me, that the right thing to do was to come to the table and resolve things privately. I blocked each number after reading the message once. I was not angry. Anger requires a sense of injustice, and I had moved past injustice into something more settled. I understood my family's operating system well enough that nothing they did surprised me. They would do what they always did. The difference was that I had built a structure around which their usual tactics had no purchase. Margaret Chen filed the co-owner protective motion on July 17th. The court acknowledged receipt 3 days later. The bank's attorneys, who had been dealing with a straightforward foreclosure proceeding, now had a more complicated matter to navigate. Preston, I learned from David Reeves on July 20th, had retained a criminal defense attorney. The attorney had reached out to the SEC Enforcement Division. Negotiations about the scope of cooperation were beginning. Charlotte had retained her own attorney, as I had advised her to do. She had called me once in the interim, a brief call, not about the legal situation, just to tell me that Jade had asked about me and Marcus, and that she hoped Marcus was doing well. It was a small call, imprecise, not doing most of the work that needed to be done between us. But it was the kind of call that suggested the possibility of a different direction, and I had noted it. On August 3rd, my parents called. Not my mother alone. Both of them on speakerphone, which was a departure from the usual. My father generally preferred to let my mother handle what he called family communication, meaning the emotional management of anything uncomfortable. I was at my desk when the call came in. Marcus was at camp. The cardboard boat was where it always was. I answered, "Veronica." My father's voice first he had apparently decided to open, which meant my mother had spent some time preparing him for a specific kind of conversation. "We'd like to sit down and talk, in person, without attorneys if possible." "That won't be possible," I said. Anything substantive about the property or the HELOC needs to go through Margaret Chen's office. A pause. Then my mother, We're not calling about the property. What are you calling about? Another pause, the kind that contains a prepared speech being located and delivered. We've been doing a great deal of thinking, my mother said, about the 4th of July, about some things that were said. I waited. What I said about Marcus was... She stopped. Started again. It was unkind. It was said in a way that was... I should not have said it in that way, in that setting. The qualification in the last sentence, in that way, in that setting, was doing a lot of work. It was not an apology for what she had said. It was an apology for where and how she had said it. The distinction was important, and I noted it. Is that what you wanted to tell me? I said. We want you to know that we have nothing but respect for what you've done for Marcus, my father said. He had the specific tone of a man reading from a list. Adoption is an admirable thing. We perhaps haven't expressed that as clearly as we should have. The passive construction, the hedging, the admission shaped as an aesthetic failure rather than a moral one. Gerald, I said, using his first name again as I had at the table. I appreciate that you're making this call. I want to be honest with you about what I'm hearing. You're telling me the problem was in the expression, not in the underlying belief, and I don't think that's actually what you want me to hear. Silence. I think what you actually need to tell me, I said, is that you understand why what was said was wrong, not where it was said or how loudly, why it was wrong, and I don't hear that yet. A long pause. He's a child, my mother said. Her voice was different, the managed quality less present, something more raw underneath. I know he's a child. He is, I said. He's my child. And he has spent the last 3 years learning that the world can be safe, learning that the people who love him will be consistent, learning that he doesn't have to monitor every room for signs of rejection. I paused. And then he sat at your table and you told everyone within earshot that he shouldn't have come. He's 7. He felt that. My mother didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said very quietly, I know. It was the most honest thing I had heard from her in years, possibly ever. It was 2 words and it contained nothing beyond them, no justification, no redirection, just the simple acknowledgement of a fact she had been avoiding. I sat with it for a moment. I'm not able to have the conversations that need to happen while the legal matters are active, I said. Margaret's office will handle the property questions. The SEC and Connecticut AG will handle the other matters. When those things are resolved, I'm willing to talk about what a relationship between you and Marcus looks like going forward. But that's a conversation for later. Is there going to be a later? My father asked. His voice was raw in a way I had not heard before. I don't know yet, I said honestly. That depends on what both of you do in the time between now and then. Not what you say, what you do. I said goodbye and ended the call. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment with the cardboard boat on the desk and the morning light coming through the window, and I let the call settle in me. Not resolution, not reconciliation, a crack in a wall through which a small amount of light was visible. Whether it widened or closed depended on things that were not yet determined. It was enough for now. The legal machinery moved with the specific combination of speed and slowness that characterizes federal financial cases: fast in the accumulation of evidence, slow in the formal procedures, then fast again, when the pieces aligned and something concrete happened. Preston Whitmore III was indicted on August 19th on 11 counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and 3 counts of investment advisor fraud. His attorney had spent 2 weeks attempting to negotiate a cooperation agreement that would reduce his exposure in exchange for information about other participants in the scheme. The SEC rejected the initial terms. A revised agreement was submitted and also rejected. The indictment was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was public record. By Tuesday evening, it was being discussed in the specific corners of the internet where financial fraud is tracked by the people who follow these things. Charlotte called me that evening. I saw it, she said. I know, I said. 11 counts. Her voice was careful, contained. She had been doing that more containing things processing before speaking, which was different from her previous habit of managing the surface while avoiding the substance. The cooperation negotiation fell apart, I said. That's why it moved to indictment. He didn't tell me, she said. That it fell apart. He said last week that it was progressing. A pause. He lied to me about that too. Yes, I said. How many times do you think he lied to me? She asked. It was not a rhetorical question. She wanted an answer. I don't know the exact number, I said. But the pattern of the fraud required a consistent maintenance of false information across multiple relationships. People who do this successfully are usually practiced at it. Did you know? She asked. Before you started investigating, did you suspect him specifically? No, I said. I started with the HELOC. He came into the picture because the money went to his fund. She was quiet for a moment. So if they hadn't taken out the loan, if they hadn't forged your signature, you never would have found the fund. Probably not, I said. Not through this path. So they destroyed themselves, she said, by trying to steal from you. Yes, I said. A long silence. Veronica, she said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. All right. Did you, when you disclosed everything at the table on the 4th, did you do it because of what Mom said about Marcus, or was that already planned? I thought about how to answer this accurately. The disclosure was not contingent on what happened at the table, I said. I had decided to bring it at that event regardless. What happened with Marcus? I paused. What happened with Marcus removed any remaining hesitation I had about the timing. It didn't create the decision, it confirmed it. So you were going to do it anyway? Yes, but you let me believe in the moment that it was because of Marcus. I didn't say it was because of Marcus, I said. I said what happened with Marcus removed my last reason to wait. Charlotte was quiet for a long time. That's a very precise distinction, she said. I'm a very precise person, I said. Another silence. Then unexpectedly Charlotte laughed. It was a short surprise sound, not a happy laugh exactly, but a real one, the laugh of someone who has encountered something that catches them off guard. You really are, she said. I always thought it meant you were cold. But it's not cold, is it? You actually think about things before you do them. I try to, I said. I've never done that, she said. I've let things happen around me and reacted. I thought that was easier. She stopped. I thought if I didn't look too closely at things, they'd stay manageable. Iomung, things don't stay manageable because you don't look at them, I said. They just become unmanageable in the dark instead of in the light. Is that an actuary thing? It's a true thing, I said. Actuaries just say it with more numbers. She laughed again, longer this time. It sounded different from the laugh I remembered from family dinners, less performed, less aware of itself. What do I do now? She said. Practically, what do I actually do? You've seen your attorney. 3 times. She's good. She's very good, actually. A pause. She said my name is clean. From the fund, she said I'm not exposed criminally, but the assets are assets. Some of them are going to be frozen or seized as part of the proceedings. The house. Charlotte's voice shifted on the word. We're renting. We have been since we sold the Darien house 3 years ago. I didn't know why we sold it. He said it was a smart move, take the equity and deploy it elsewhere. I didn't ask where. The equity went into the fund, I said, to pay earlier investors. A silence. We have Jade's tuition coming up, Charlotte said. She's applying to colleges in the fall. She wants to study law. A different quality in her voice in that last sentence, something that was not quite pride but was adjacent to it, the specific wondering affection of a parent encountering a child who is more capable than expected. She'll be good at it, I said. She will, Charlotte said. She's better than me, better than Preston, better than all of us, probably. A pause. She told me when she came home from the 4th. She sat me down and she said, Mom, I need to tell you what I saw today, and I need you to actually listen. And she told me about Marcus and about what Grandma said and about what she said at the table. Charlotte's voice was quiet. She said she was afraid I would be angry at her for making a scene. I told her I was ashamed it was a 17-year-old making the scene instead of me. What did she say? I asked. She said better late than never. Charlotte paused. She sounds like you. She sounds like herself, I said. She always has. You just needed to listen. The foreclosure proceeding on the Westport property was finalized by the court on September 8th. The bank had agreed after extended negotiation between Margaret Chen's office and their legal team to assign the fraudulent HELOC debt entirely against my parents' share of the equity rather than against the property as a whole. This meant the bank's claim was satisfied through the forced sale of their equity stake, and my share of the property, representing approximately 40% of the assessed value, given the structure of my grandmother's deed transfer, remained intact. The property went to auction on a Thursday morning. I attended by phone. Margaret attended in person. The starting bid was set at the outstanding balance on the fraudulent HELOC, plus the bank's legal costs, a figure that represented substantially less than the property's assessed value because the bank wanted to liquidate quickly and cleanly. There were two other bidders. Both dropped out at different stages as the price climbed. My final bid was accepted at 9:57 in the morning. Margaret texted me at 9:58, "It's yours." I was at my desk. Marcus was at school. The cardboard boat was where it always was. I sat for a moment with the text on my screen. Then I got up, made a cup of coffee, stood at the window, and looked at the city for a while and went back to work. I did not tell my parents immediately. Not out of cruelty. I was not interested in cruelty. I was interested in sequence. The sequence was secure, the deed clear. The property title established the legal situation fully before the personal confrontation. My parents' attorney had been in communication with Margaret throughout the foreclosure process, so they were aware in a general sense that the proceedings were moving forward. They did not know I had bid. I told them on a Saturday morning 10 days after the auction in a phone call I made from my living room while Marcus was at a birthday party 2 blocks away. My father answered, "I want to let you know that the foreclosure auction concluded on September 8th. I said, "The property has been purchased by the new owner. You have 30 days from the date of the court's execution order to vacate the premises and remove your personal belongings." A silence. "Who bought it?" my father asked. His voice was the voice of a man trying to locate a handhold on a surface that has no purchase. "I did," I said. The silence that followed was of a different quality, denser, more total. "Veronica," his voice broke on my name. "I want to be clear about something," I said. "I did not buy this property to punish you. I bought it because it is a sound real estate investment in a market I understand, and because I had the right of first purchase as a co-owner, and because the price at auction was below market value, which represents a reasonable financial opportunity." I paused. "Those are the professional reasons." "What are the personal reasons?" he asked very quietly. "The personal reason is that Marcus asked me 3 times on the drive to your 4th of July barbecue whether he would get to swim in the pool," I said. "And I would like him to be able to swim in it whenever he wants, without wondering whether he's welcome." My father made a sound that I cannot precisely describe. It was not crying. He had never cried in front of me in 36 years, and he did not cry now. It was the sound a person makes when something they built their life around reveals itself to be a structure they were not actually entitled to occupy. "Where will we go?" he asked. "That's a question for you and your attorney to work through," I said. "Margaret's office will send you the formal 30-day notice by certified mail. If you need additional time beyond 30 days to make arrangements, Margaret is authorized to discuss a short extension within reason. Miriam is—" He stopped. "Your mother is not well. This has been very hard on her." "I imagine it has," I said. "She's not sleeping. She's not herself." I thought about what to say to this, about how to be honest without being brutal, which was the specific tension of every conversation I had with my father. "I hope she gets support," I said. "I mean that genuinely. What she did was wrong and it has consequences, and she also deserves to have people who help her through what's ahead. I'm not the right person to be that support right now, but I hope she finds it." A long pause. "Are we going to lose everything?" he asked. "You've already lost the household," I said. "The criminal exposure for the identity theft and HELOC fraud, your attorney can walk you through the range of outcomes better than I can. The SEC case against Preston is separate, but your money that went into his fund is effectively gone." I paused. "Your financial situation is serious. It's not unsurvivable. People recover from serious financial situations. It requires honesty and practical decision-making, which—" I stopped. "Which we haven't been good at," he finished. "No," I said. "You haven't been." Another silence. "Veronica," he said, "I need to say something." I waited. "When you were 23, he said, and you were trying to be a parent to Riley. To your daughter, I told you things that I shouldn't have said. I was angry and I was embarrassed, and I took it out on you in ways that—" He stopped. "I have thought about those things many times. I have never said that I was wrong. I should have. I was wrong." This was not what I had expected from this call. I sat with it for a moment, letting it be what it was, rather than immediately assessing it. "I hear you," I said. "I don't expect that to change anything," he said. "I know it doesn't change anything. I needed to say it before things get further along and I lose the chance." "It doesn't change the legal situation," I said. "But I hear it." A long silence. "Take care of yourself, Gerald," I said. I used his name deliberately, not as a distancing mechanism this time, but as a form of directness, person to person without the performance of a role. He said goodbye. I ended the call. I sat for a while in the quiet apartment, and then I went to pick up Marcus from the birthday party. My parents moved out of the Westport property on October 3rd. I was not there. I did not need to be, and being there would have served no constructive purpose. Margaret had arranged for the property to be professionally inventoried the week before the move-out date, and the estate management company she retained was present on moving day to ensure the process was handled correctly. My parents rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Fairfield, smaller than the Westport house, in a complex rather than on a private lot with a parking structure instead of a 2-car garage. It was the kind of place that was perfectly adequate, and that my mother would under other circumstances have described as perfectly adequate, in a tone designed to communicate that adequate was not what she had built her life to achieve. These were different circumstances. I learned the details from Aunt Patricia, who had stayed in contact with my mother through the move, not from approval of anything that had happened, but from the specific loyalty of someone who understood that people in crisis needed practical support, regardless of how they had arrived in crisis. Patricia told me my mother had cried when she left the Westport house for the last time, standing in the driveway looking back at the porch. 15 years of their lives in that house, not all of them dishonest, not all of them performance, some of them real. The 4th of July barbecues, the Christmas gatherings, the small ordinary days that accumulate into something a person can call their history. I thought about that, about the genuine grief that can exist alongside genuine culpability, and about how those two things are not in opposition. My mother had done real harm, and she was experiencing real loss, and both of those things were true simultaneously. I was not responsible for managing her grief, but I could acknowledge that it was real. The Preston Whitmore case moved through its proceedings with the specific momentum of a federal prosecution that has overwhelming evidence and a defendant whose cooperation negotiation has failed. His attorney eventually worked out a plea agreement in November. He would plead guilty to 5 of the 11 counts in exchange for a recommended sentence at the lower end of the guidelines range. The agreement required full cooperation with the ongoing investigation into whether any other parties had knowing involvement in the fraud. That investigation had implications for Charlotte. Not criminal ones. Her attorney had established clearly that Charlotte had no meaningful knowledge of the fund's fraudulent structure and no financial benefit from it beyond her ordinary household expenses. But there was a civil dimension. Some of the investor plaintiffs who were pursuing restitution through a parallel civil action initially named Charlotte as a party based on her status as Preston's spouse. Charlotte's attorney filed a motion to dismiss her from the civil action, supported by documentation of her separate financial life and the evidence that she had not received preferential information or benefits. The motion was granted in early December. Charlotte called me the evening the motion was granted. "I want to take Jade to see the Westport house," she said. "If that's all right. I don't want to make it complicated. Jade has been talking about it, about the pool, about Marcus. I'll be there on the 16th, I said. Marcus is out of school for winter break. You and Jade are welcome to come. A pause. Really? Yes, I said. Really. The 16th of December was a cold, clear Connecticut day, the kind where the sky is a particular hard blue, and the bare trees have a structural beauty that isn't visible when they're in leaf. I had driven up with Marcus the evening before. We had turned the heat on and put clean sheets on the beds, and Marcus had run through all the rooms, announcing their names and purposes, which he had decided about each room based on a system that was not entirely clear to me, but was clearly consistent. The big room with the window seat was the reading room. The one overlooking the garden was the thinking room. His bedroom, which he had selected immediately, a southwest-facing room with 2 windows and a built-in bookshelf that had been empty when we arrived, he called the safe room. He said it without apparent weight, just as a descriptive term, but I had sat on the edge of his bed that night and thought about it for a long time after he was asleep. The safe room. Charlotte and Jade arrived at 11 in the morning in Charlotte's car. Not the expensive one, a modest sedan she had bought after the legal proceedings began affecting their financial situation. Jade got out first, looked at the house for a moment with the particular attention she brought to things, and then looked at me. "It's a good house," she said. "I think so," I said. Marcus appeared from inside at the sound of voices and positioned himself in the doorway with the specific dignity of a 7-year-old who considers himself the host. "You can come in, Mon," he told Jade. "I'll show you the rooms." Jade looked at me amused. "He's been the tour guide since we arrived," I said. "I would love a tour." Jade told Marcus very seriously. He led her inside. Charlotte stood on the porch looking at the wraparound railing, the view of the garden, the bare trees beyond. "I spent a lot of Christmases here," she said. "I know," I said. "It doesn't feel the same now," she said. "It feels smaller somehow. Or not smaller, just more normal, like an actual house instead of..." She searched for the word. "A stage set," I said. "Yes." She looked at me. "Is that terrible to say?" "No," I said. "I think it's accurate." We went inside. I made coffee while Charlotte walked through the rooms, quietly reacquainting herself with a space that was the same in structure and different in everything else. The furniture different, the objects different, the atmosphere entirely different. The house that had smelled of my mother's careful curation now smelled of coffee and Marcus's sneakers and the specific slightly chaotic warmth of a place where a child lived. Charlotte stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, watching me. "You changed the paint in here," she said. "Yellow," I said. "It's good." She said it like she was discovering the word. "It's actually good." From somewhere deeper in the house, we could hear Jade conducting Marcus on the reverse tour, Marcus's tour having apparently evolved into a collaborative project in which Jade was now also explaining things to him, her voice warm and patient and clear, and Marcus's responses punctuated by the sound of him opening and closing the built-in bookshelf in his room. Charlotte held her coffee cup with both hands and listened to the sound of her daughter and my son somewhere in the interior of the house, and her face did something I had not seen on it before, not the managed surface, not the careful presentation, just a person being present in a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "at the barbecue, that he was a child and that made him everyone's responsibility." "Yes," I said. "I've been thinking about all the times I didn't act on that. Not just with Marcus, with other things." She looked at her coffee. She's been talking to me differently since July. Like she decided something and acted on it. She said something to me in October that I keep thinking about. Charlotte paused. She said, "Mom, I've been watching how you decide things your whole life, and I've decided I'm not going to decide things that way." I looked at my sister. "What way was that?" I asked. She said, "By figuring out what everyone else needs the situation to be, and then doing that." Charlotte's voice was very quiet. She said she wants to figure out what's actually true, and then do that instead. "She's going to be extraordinary," I said. "She already is." Charlotte set down her coffee cup. "I'm going to be better. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm working on it. I'm seeing someone, a therapist. I've been going for 2 months. She looked at me directly. "I'm trying to learn how to actually look at things." "That matters," I said. "Does it to you? Does it change anything between us?" I thought about this carefully because it deserved a careful answer. "It changes what's possible," I said. "It doesn't erase what happened. Both of those things are true." She nodded. She had been doing that, more accepting things without immediately working to reframe them. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The house," she said. "You said you bought it because it was a good investment and because Marcus should be able to swim in the pool. Are those really the only reasons?" I looked at the yellow walls of the kitchen, at the coffee maker on the counter and the drawing Marcus had made at camp, a house with a pool and stick figures which he had given me when I told him we were going to have a different house taped to the cabinet. "One more reason," I said. "What?" "My grandmother put me on the deed because she understood what this family was and she wanted to make sure I had something that couldn't be taken from me," I said. She did it without telling me. She did it as an act of love that I didn't find out about until I needed it. I paused. I wanted to do something with it that would have made sense to her. I think she would have liked the yellow walls. I think she would have liked Marcus. Charlotte's eyes were bright. She would have, she said. She absolutely would have. From down the hall, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway with Jade behind him. Jade says we should get a dog, Marcus announced. Jade is a troublemaker, I said. I'm a visionary, Jade said. Marcus looked between us, assessing the situation with the perceptive attention he brought to all adult exchanges. Can we get a dog? Let's talk about it, I said, which in my experience was the answer that bought the most time without constituting a lie. Marcus considered this. Okay, he said. He looked at Jade. She said, let's talk about it. That's better than no, Jade said to him. Yeah, Marcus said, and went back down the hall. Charlotte looked at Jade. You're going to be a great lawyer, Charlotte said. I know, Jade said, and disappeared after Marcus. Charlotte looked at me, and we both unexpectedly laughed. Preston Whitmore III was sentenced in February to 4 years and 3 months in federal prison, plus restitution to the 14 investors in his fund in the total amount of $3.2 million. Restitution in fraud cases is often collected slowly and incompletely, and I did not expect the full amount to materialize. But the judgment was real, and the precedent it set for the civil proceedings mattered. My parents pleaded guilty and marched my mother to 1 count of felony identity theft, and 1 count of bank fraud, my father to 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The plea agreement was negotiated by their attorney over the winter. My mother received a sentence of 18 months of home confinement and 5 years of probation, plus restitution to me of the legal and financial costs associated with the fraudulent HELOC. My father received 12 months of probation. I had provided a victim impact statement to the court. I had not attended the sentencing. The restitution payments would come from whatever assets remained after the creditors of the HELOC were satisfied, which was limited. The practical value of the restitution was less important to me than its legal existence, the acknowledgement by a court of what had been done. I was not present for these proceedings in the way that some people need to be present. I did not need to watch the gavel come down or see my parents' faces at the moment of sentencing. I had already had the moment I needed at a 4th of July barbecue when I had placed a manila envelope on a teakwood table and watched 18 months of work begin to do what work does when it reaches its conclusion. What I needed after that was the rest of it, the part that came after that. Spring arrived on the Connecticut shoreline in the particular way it arrives there, cautiously, the cold releasing its grip over several weeks rather than all at once, the water staying gray for longer than the trees, which were already tentatively green, by the time the lake temperature became what Marcus described as not cold anymore. We had been at the Westport house on weekends through the winter, driving up on Friday evenings, spending Saturday and Sunday, driving back Sunday night. Marcus had developed specific weekend rituals. Saturday morning was for the puzzle books, Aunt Patricia kept supplying. Saturday afternoon was for whatever project he had conceived. During the week, Sunday morning was for what he called slow breakfast, which meant I made eggs, and we ate them without any particular schedule. He had become a decisive person about the house. This surprised me and then didn't. He had always been a decisive person, but in our apartment in the city, there were parameters on what he could decide. Here there were more of them, and he engaged with each one with the serious attention of someone taking an important job seriously. He had opinions about where to put things. He had decided the reading room needed a different lamp. He had decided the garden needed a bird feeder, which we had installed, and he now monitored it with a persistence that I found both charming and slightly alarming in its intensity. He had decided we needed a dog. This had moved from suggestion to campaign over the winter, prosecuted with the focused determination of someone who understands that sustained pressure yields results. He had researched breeds. I looked them up, he told me with an air of professional thoroughness, and had determined that a medium-sized dog would be best, and had identified a rescue organization 40 minutes from the Westport house. In April, we went. The dog Marcus selected was a 3-year-old mixed breed with brown and white coloring and an expression that suggested considerable reserves of both patience and mischief. Marcus sat with him in the visiting room for 20 minutes, during which the dog put his head in Marcus's lap, and Marcus looked at me with the expression of someone who has resolved a question. His name is Biscuit, Marcus told me. That's his current name, the rescue coordinator said. You can rename him if you'd like. His name is Biscuit, Marcus said with a finality that was not unkind but was absolute. Biscuit came home with us. In May I had lunch with my mother. She had asked through Aunt Patricia whether I would be willing to meet. I had thought about it for 2 weeks and then said yes. We met at a small restaurant in Westport, neutral ground public space, the specific geography of a first real conversation rather than a confrontation. My mother looked different. The 18 months since the 4th of July had rearranged her in ways that were visible. She was thinner. She had cut her hair shorter than it had been in years. She wore no jewelry except small gold earrings, the kind she wore when she wasn't dressing for an audience. She looked for the first time I could remember like a person rather than a presentation. We ordered. We talked about small things for the first several minutes, the drive, the weather, a neutral mutual subject. And then when the food arrived and we were both looking at our plates, my mother put down her fork and looked at me. I have something I need to say, she said. I waited. I spent 72 years building a version of my life that was mostly about how it looked, she said. Her voice was very different from the voice she had used at the 4th of July table. There was no performance in it. It was just speech, the way people talk when they have stopped trying to manage the impression they're making. I told myself it was about the family, about what I was building for the family, but that was not honest. It was about me, about needing to be a certain kind of person in a certain kind of life. She looked at her coffee cup. I have been in therapy, she said. I know it probably sounds like something I'm saying because it's what you're supposed to say, but I've been going twice a week since November, and I want to tell you what I've understood because I think I owe you the honest version rather than the managed one. I'm listening, I said. I treated you as a disappointment because you didn't fit the life I was managing, she said. You went a different direction than I had planned for, and instead of understanding that you were building something real and valuable, I treated it as a deviation. I treated your son as a deviation. I said things at that table that were... She stopped. There isn't a good word for it. They were cruel. They were cruel to a child who had already experienced more cruelty than any child should, and I said them because I was protecting a version of my life that wasn't even real. She met my eyes. I am sorry, she said. I am sorry for what I said about Marcus. I'm sorry for the years of treating you as less than you were. I'm sorry for the HELOC. Which was, I know it was a crime, and I know I'm accountable for it, and I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm just asking you to know that I understand what I did and why it was wrong. The restaurant was quiet around us. Sun through the window, the ordinary sounds of a weekday lunch. I hear you, Maine, I said. Is there anything you want to say to me? She asked. I thought about this, about what was true and what needed to be said. I didn't do any of this to punish you, I said. I want to be clear about that. What I did, the legal reporting, the property, those things were about protecting myself and Marcus, not about making you suffer. I know, she said. I know that now. I didn't know it at first. At first I told myself it was revenge, but that was easier than understanding that you had had enough, and that having had enough was reasonable. It was, I said. Will you let me know Marcus? She asked. I'm not asking to be reinstated. I'm not asking for the family events and the holiday gatherings. I'm asking if there is a path over time to being someone he knows, someone who shows up consistently and doesn't make him feel like an inconvenience. I looked at my mother, at the 72-year-old woman across from me who had been in turns the source of significant harm and the person who had loved me in the imperfect, distorted way of someone who had never learned to love without condition. Both of those things were true. Both of those things were real. That depends on what you do, I said. Not what you say today, what you do in the next year and the year after that. Consistency matters to Marcus more than grand gestures. Reliability matters. Showing up when you say you will and not when you're suddenly interested matters. I paused. If you can do that, then yes, there is a path. She nodded. She did not argue with any of it. She did not offer a counterproposal or a qualification. She just nodded. Can I ask you one thing? She said. Yes. The house, she said. Are you happy there? I thought about the yellow kitchen and the cardboard boat and Biscuit sleeping at the foot of Marcus's bed and the bird feeder that Marcus monitored with such dedication and the reading room and the thinking room and the safe room. Yes, I said. We're very happy there. She held my gaze for a moment. Good, she said, simply, without qualification or condition. Good, it was in the end the right word. There is a moment that I return to sometimes when I'm trying to locate the center of everything that happened. Not the moment at the table with the manila envelope, not the property auction or the indictment or the sentencing, not even the phone call where my father said the things he had never said before. The moment I return to is smaller than any of those. It's the afternoon of the 4th of July before I went to the pool area, standing at the edge of the long teakwood table, looking at what was left of the lunch my mother had arranged so carefully. The shattered crystal and the half-eaten food and the dying citronella candles, the white linen tablecloth that had been pristine 3 hours earlier. Standing there in the wreckage of the event, I had felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction in the way that revenge produces satisfaction. Something quieter. The specific, unflashy feeling of having put something down that you have been carrying for a very long time. The physical release of a weight whose presence you had stopped registering because you had been carrying it for so long, it had become part of your sense of normal. I had been carrying it since I was the oldest daughter, the one who didn't quite fit, the one who went the wrong direction, the one who came to events and absorbed the ambient diminishment and drove home and got on with her life. I had been carrying it since the first time I understood that my son was not going to be included in the same way that a biological grandchild would have been included, and had started making the quiet calculation of how much protection I would need to build around him. Setting it down did not mean it had not been heavy. It did not mean the carrying had not cost me something real. It meant that I was no longer required to carry it, and that on the other side of setting it down was a house with yellow walls and a dog named Biscuit, and a 7-year-old who had decided to call his bedroom the safe room because I came to understand over time he meant it precisely. It was safe. It was his. It was the place he went when the world required him to be small and where the world did not require him to be small at all. On a Saturday morning in June, a year and 2 months after the 4th of July barbecue, Marcus and I were sitting on the dock at the Westport house in the early morning light. Biscuit was at the edge of the dock monitoring the water with the alert suspicion of an animal that has not ruled out the possibility that the water contains something requiring his attention. Marcus was eating a piece of toast and watching a great blue heron that had landed at the far edge of the lawn and was standing in the particular motionless way herons stand as if they have determined that absolute stillness is the correct response to all situations. "Why doesn't it move?" Marcus asked. "It's waiting," I said. "For what?" "For the right moment," I said. "It's watching the water. When it sees what it's waiting for, it will know." Marcus thought about this for a while, chewing his toast. "Do people do that?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. "The good ones." He considered this. The heron did not move. The water reflected the early light in the specific way it reflected it in the hour before the day fully assembled itself. "Mom," Marcus said. "Yes. I like it here." "I know," I said. "I do too." He leaned against me, the easy, unconscious weight of a child who has learned that the person beside him will hold the weight without comment. I put my arm around him and we sat on the dock while the heron stood its patient watch at the lawn's edge, and the water held the light and the morning continued to arrive. This is what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story. The weight you are carrying, the years of absorbed diminishment, the recalibrated sense of what you are allowed to want, the practiced habit of making yourself smaller so others can feel larger. That weight is real. The fact that you have learned to carry it so well that you have stopped noticing it does not mean it is not there. You do not have to carry it forever. The work of setting it down is not dramatic. It does not require a single decisive moment, though those moments sometimes come. It requires the patient accumulation of clarity, looking at what is actually true, rather than what you have been told is true. Building something that is yours rather than waiting for permission to occupy space that was always yours by right. The people who diminish you are not doing it because you are diminishable. They are doing it because your actual size is inconvenient to the story they need to tell about themselves. When you stop participating in that story, the structure falls, not because you destroyed it, because it required your participation to stand. Your children, biological or chosen, born to you, or arrived through the long and difficult and profound path of adoption, deserve to live in the part of the story that comes after, the part where the weight is down and the house has yellow walls and the dog has an undignified name. And the morning comes in whatever way mornings come when you are no longer managing someone else's version of your life. That part exists. I promise you it exists. Build toward it. Do the patient, unglamorous, methodical work of building toward it. And when the moment comes, as it will come if you build toward it, let it arrive. Then go find your kids.